Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and I'm joined by public officials in Westchester County of all political stripe and from all different types of jurisdictions. We have with us members of the New York State Senate, the New York State Assembly. We have members from the Westchester County Board of Legislators, including their chairman, Ben Boykin. We have elected mayors of our largest cities. We have supervisors of our towns, mayors of our villages. We have council members, trustees, all of whom are here today to speak with a singular voice. We have called them together today because the crisis that we've had over the last 8 days is one that has focused all of our attentions almost solely to the exclusion of many other things that each of our governments are responsible for. But the crisis that we face began with Mother Nature, but it isn't a story about Mother Nature. It's a story about human response to that crisis and how organizations respond under crisis. The people that you see alongside of me have responsibility for local police departments. They have responsibility for DPW crews. They have responsibility for EMS professionals and fire department professionals and people who had senior citizen programs. And every one of them in their respective communities, understanding that we were facing and went into a crisis, called together their professionals. As Westchester County Executive, I am not a professional in those fields. I call upon people like Joan McDonald, our Director of Operations, Kathy O'Connor, who's here as our Commissioner of Parks, Ken Jenkins, Deputy County Executive, and a host of other people to help us make intelligent decisions about how do we respond to a crisis. And the most important point, every single person here, and I think I know every single person, and we may have political differences from time to time, but every single person here puts at the top of their list the human needs of the people that they represent. Some of the folks here have been in public office, as I am in this position, for a matter of months. Some, like Linda Puglisi, have served decades of service to their communities. Some of the people you see here receive no compensation for their responsibilities. We have mayors of villages like Larchmont and Rybrook, City of Rye, unpaid elected officials, and yet they put their time and their energy and their effort into providing a public service. Why do I say that up front? Because I'm here today to be critical. Now, you saw a video of me when I lost my temper, and the people who know me know I almost never lose my temper. I may be one of the folks that can go for extreme lengths of time without popping my cork. But I lost my temper a couple of days ago because I had seen enough example of how the utility companies that serve Westchester County not serving Westchester County. And we are each empowered with responsibility as well as authority. Now, many of us, certainly I have, served in positions in business. Some have owned businesses, some have worked for corporate organizations of all sorts. And when you work in a corporation, you generally have competition. You generally have somebody else who's trying to provide the same service or product that you are. And you have to provide that service or product at the best possible level, or you won't stay in business. In my very early career as a salesman, I had a quota. If you miss the quota, you lose your job. It's very simple. It's not complicated at all. For all of us in public office, there is a day of reckoning for every single one of us. It may be later this year, it might be in a month, it could be certainly any time over the next 4 years. But every one of us understands that when that day of reckoning comes, the people will render a judgment on our leadership. To solve this crisis, we needed the cooperation and the coordination of all of these governments, and we had them. There was an outstanding job done, and I know. I spent every single night of the last 8 nights driving around by myself to town after town after town to see for myself which trees were down so I could understand it. Why? Because I'm the chief executive officer of this county. I was born in this county. I love this county. And I now have the responsibility for the care and the concern of every person in this county, a shared responsibility that I have with all of these other officials who are friends, as I said, even when we disagree. We have that shared responsibility. That's why every single one of us ran for office. The utilities that serve Westchester, that did not serve Westchester, did not merely fail because they were not prepared. There's a moment of accountability that is yet to come. It will be held by the Board of Legislators under the leadership of Ben Boykin. Alfreda Williams, the Vice Chair, is here. Catherine Borgia, the Majority Leader, is here. It'll be held accountable by the Public Service Commission. John Rhodes spent most of the week down here with us as part of the state's response to this crisis. but there is a responsibility to act immediately and to respond to what's happening in the field. It is not good enough to say, well, things aren't going well, and after this is all over, we'll make an assessment. That's not what prudent people do. That's not what you do in your personal life. You don't watch something happen and say, well, I guess after it's all over and the house burns down, I'll then assess why the house burned down. You try to fight it and deal with it as it goes along. The initial windstorm that happened on Friday night was of greater severity and greater breadth of impact than most of us anticipated. But that did not mean that by the next morning, DPW crews on a Saturday were ready to be deployed to take obstacles out of the road. And what they found was an inadequate response by the utility companies, not because the actual workers had any deficiency at all. They are heroes in this story, and not only the workers of Con Edison and NYSEG, but the workers of Indiana, Michigan, Texas, Quebec, places that came from a long distance, left their families for a week to be here to provide 17-hour service, 12-hour service, whatever the deployment is. But these elected officials were prepared on Saturday morning to start getting people back to normalcy. The utilities were not. They were not. Now, when you look at the track record of what happened here, you saw a deficiency that over Saturday and Sunday, 2 days of very perfect weather, insufficient number of people were put back online. We never at one point in time did we ever know how many crews were deployed. And in that video that you saw where I lost my temper, that came after listening to about an hour and 10 minutes of one of the daily conference calls. I heard the mayor of New Rochelle, who's going to speak, say on that conference call, I have a city of 75,000 people. I have one crew to handle that city. I had just previously heard on the call the mayor of Rye City, which is about 1/20th or 1/5 the size of New Rochelle, say, I have one crew. What do I have to fight this with? I have ready at the ready our DPW, our police, ready to interact. And then, when I really was upset, was when I heard that there were individuals who were giving false information from the utility companies, trying to put the responsibility back on the local governments. And what I heard them say, I heard it said on the radio, we can't restore the power until the obstacles are taken out of the road. They're talking about not being able to do the third step of the process because the second step, the obstacles in the road, had not been done. What they failed to talk about was the first step, which is the utility company must be the first responder to make the assessment of the wires, if they're live wires, and if so, what must be done to put them in a position where they could be neutralized so that the second step, the clearing of the obstacle, could occur. And when I heard that, I said, I'm now listening to corporate excuse making. I'm listening to people who are trying to shift the burden. They're more worried about the public relations aspect of this crisis than the stories of individual human beings. So let's hear some of the stories of individual human beings. Let's take these statistics, 90% of this, 80% of that, and let's put a human face on it. Let's make sure that there are people that hear those stories. So before we have the stories, I do want two public officials to share exactly what they went through in this process. First, I'm going to ask the mayor of New Rochelle, Noam Bramson, to talk about his experience, to be followed by Linda Puglisi, who's the supervisor of the town of Cortland. Mr. Mayor. Stay there. I'll go past you.
Well, good morning. I want to thank the county executive for calling us together. It's an honor also to be with so many colleagues in government. We've been participating, as the county executive noted, in twice daily, sometimes thrice daily conference calls. We've all gotten to know each other by voice, but I think the fact that we're here together in person illustrates the extraordinary importance of this moment. And I think the county executive did such an outstanding job of vocalizing the frustration that each of us is feeling, and more importantly, the frustration that each of us is hearing from the residents that we represent. And when you are out of power for a week or more, it is much more than an inconvenience, particularly if you are elderly, if you are suffering from a medical condition, if you have young children. These are extraordinarily difficult hardships. And as the county executive rightly pointed out, there are many outstanding people working to address this challenge. The line crews, the municipal representatives who have been embedded with our departments of public works and our municipal governments have been wonderful, heroic even, in addressing this challenge in the most difficult of circumstances. But they need leadership that is as good as they are. And it is evident that when you talk about the quantity of resources that have been applied to this challenge, the quality of information that is flowing to the public at large and to the municipal leadership, by all of these standards, there have been dramatic failures. You know, imagine being told your power is going to be restored Tuesday night at 9 o'clock. Tuesday comes and goes. Then being told your power is going to be restored Thursday at 9 o'clock. Thursday comes and goes. Being told your power is going to be restored Friday at 9 o'clock. Friday comes and goes. So even providing realistic estimates so that people can plan around it, can organize their lives around realism and truth, would be enormously beneficial. And I just heard from a neighbor who was staying an hour away with family, 3 young children, got a phone call, an automated phone call saying, "Congratulations, your power's back on." Packs the kids into the car, drives an hour only to arrive home to a cold, dark house. And even on that most basic level of ensuring that those automated messages, which have a legitimate purpose, it is to determine how extensive repairs have been and how extensive outages remain. Simply to phrase those calls in a way which does not psychologically prepare people for recovery, when in fact that is not the case, even that kind of small step, which would be beneficial, seems to have eluded our friends at Con Edison. So I thank you, County Executive, for your clarion call. Obviously, our priority right now is to get the juice flowing as quickly as possible to everybody, but it is essential that there be accountability, and it is essential that there be lessons learned, so that the next time this happens, and inevitably it will happen again because we don't control the weather, the next time this happens, we can serve our constituents better, and the utilities can serve their customers better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, County Executive, for your leadership and for your compassion for all of us. We truly appreciate it. The County Executive said that I've been town supervisor for 3 decades. I'm close. 27 years, and I have gone through storm, hurricanes, nor'easters, floodings, Hurricane Sandy, and of course the nor'easters that we've had within the last 8 days. And it is the same ending of the story. And let me tell you, it's not a happy ending. It's a nightmare. Weather event after weather event. We have, and from the southern part of the county all the way up to the northern part of the county in Cortland, we all have the same stories. We're not being heard. We don't have enough crews. We don't have enough restoration crews. They're not calling in contractors from outside of Westchester County until it's almost too late. And then when they come, it's 6-7 days into the event. They told us yesterday on the conference call, which lasted 2 hours, by the way, with Con Edison, that they were going to bring in some contractors from Ohio, I think it was, Michigan. They're not arriving until Saturday afternoon. I mean, I just want to pull my hair out. I mean, it's just absolutely unfathomable to me. I remember going to the Moreland Commission right after Hurricane Sandy. Sandy was on October 29, 2012. A couple months later, the state had a Moreland Commission. Purchase College is where I went, and I testified, told them our situation, which parallels what's happening right now. They're not responsive. They're not preparing. They're not bringing in enough crews to assist this large county and all of these wonderful people here who are doing everything they can for their communities and their workers and their crews around the clock. They're out there. And in the middle of the nor'easter, then they had to go to the second one, which was plowing the roads. I mean, it is a nightmare, absolutely outrageous. It has to end. They have to be broken up. I said this at the Moreland Commission. Con Edison is too large. They own Orange and Rockland over in Rockland County. They own other utilities. They think we don't know because it's different names. Oh, we know. They're too big. It's a conglomerate. It's an old-fashioned monopoly. I thought they were broken up years ago, right? Not this one. It has to be broken up. They need to hear us. They haven't yet. Over my 27 years as town supervisor, they have not heard us. Well, darn it, they're going to hear us this time. We're not going to give up, led by our county executive. We have 1,900 homes still without power, county executive, 21 roads that are still closed. That equates to 8,000 people and small businesses. Small businesses have been out of power, so they have lost money. So the list is endless. I could go on. I have about 5 of these with my notes that I've been taking, and it's going to be a bestseller. Let me tell you. Thank you again. Thank you to all of you for everything you do for your communities. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And the stories that are told by New Rochelle and Cortland could be replicated by every other single community that's here. And there are 45 municipalities in Westchester County. I'm not sure the exact number that are represented here, in the vicinity of 30 some odd communities. And to the extent that anybody in the press wants to have a more detailed conversation, talk to the mayor of Port Chester, who's here. Talk to the mayor of White Plains, who is here. Talk to the mayor of Rye City. Talk to the councilman who's here from Pound Ridge. Talk to the councilwoman who's here from North Castle. Story after story after story. Now, that's from the side of people who are trying to deal with the problem, to try to address it in an intelligent way. And those who are legislators are not outside of the process, because when a person is frustrated, they call anybody they can. I got an email from a woman by the name of Susan Batari in Larchmont, actually in the unincorporated part of Mamaroneck town. And I went down to see her situation. And I saw the tree that was down on Rock Ridge, and I went to her house, rang her doorbell. She has a son who has MS. And I don't care what your position is, you have a human reaction to watching somebody who's in need, and they're asking you, they're looking at you, can you solve my problem? And I spoke to her for a few minutes. I saw how cold the house was. And as I walked back out, as I was walking back to my car, I'm the county executive of Westchester County. I have to put that request into the same bland, open-ended situation as anybody else would hear, with no knowledge of how fast that person would be responded to. I called a staff member to follow up. Susan Batari had no heat as of the last two nights, even though we prioritized a case of human need. So let's talk about some of the individuals involved. Rikia Mills is a resident of Mount Vernon, from the Pasadena Park section of Mount Vernon, and I want her to be able to share her story with us. Rikia.
We've been without power since Friday morning. I have 2 disabled children, and they never should have been in this situation. It's so hard to come home to a cold house and have to bring them with me because they don't handle change well. And then speaking with Con Ed, and they keep telling us, oh, it'll be back on, it'll be back on. So we canceled our hotel room. Then we couldn't find a hotel. By the time we found one, it was the middle of this snowstorm, and I'm driving with my kids in the storm and getting text messages saying my power's back on. So I rushed back home, and it's still off, and I shouldn't have been out in that storm. I shouldn't have had my children out in that storm. I sleep with oxygen every night. I've been using portable tanks. I ran out 2 days ago, and Con Ed didn't care. They just left us like that, and it's not fair. It really is not fair. And they had no answers. My power came back on maybe 20 minutes ago, but according to them this morning, we weren't going to have power until next week. What do you do with that? How do you take that information and even explain it to small children, and not necessarily children who really understand what's happening? All they know is their comfort zone, and they're way out of that now. They've missed a week of school because we had no power. That's not fair. We have no heat, we had no hot water. This is not okay. Not at all.
Thank you. Next, we'd like Anthony Carpentieri, a Valhalla resident, to share his story. Anthony?
Good morning. My story pales in comparison to the prior speaker. I wish you speedy recovery with your issue. But I live in the town of Mount Pleasant in the hamlet of Valhalla for more than 30 years with my wife. And my 3 adult children also live in Westchester County. We lost power Friday afternoon. It was restored last night, but my daughter also has MS, and the concern was the storage of her medicine, which is very expensive and has to be kept at a certain temperature. And I have 3 small grandchildren, and we were going from house to house. But regardless, we registered the outage on the website, and we called numerous times. And it's difficult to get through to a live person, but we were able to get through on multiple times on each day. And the story was always the same. The story was always the power would be restored by 11 p.m. I don't know how many times I heard that same time, 11 p.m. I have an extensive math background. The probability of the power being restored at 11 p.m. is just of the highest probability, not likely. So, it was finally restored. The issue that I have is one of transparency and accountability. You really need to communicate about what real story is. Is it resources? Is it material? Is it equipment? I think if people know what the story is, they can make proper plans. They could go to a hotel, they could go stay with family, they could help their children, whatever the case may be, the elders. They really need to know the real story. And I feel that Con Ed wasn't doing that. I feel that they should have been out to the neighborhoods, telling people after day 3 maybe, what the story was, giving them the real estimated time of completion. And I feel that that wasn't occurring. And I give a lot of credit to the linesmen and everyone else that was doing the work. But to be honest, I drove around all of Mount Pleasant, Hawthorne, Thornwood, Valhalla, all of my planes, and I think I only saw maybe 2 Con Ed trucks, maybe. I saw trucks from out of town, but I did not see Con Ed. I don't know where they were, but that was the greatest concern I had. And the other concern was, did they forget about me? And I think everyone had that concern. Where am I on the list? And that gets back to the communication. And I'm glad it's been restored, and I really hope your situation gets resolved soon. But I think they could have done a better job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
A third resident who's going to share his story is a resident of the town of North Castle, Kathleen McNaughton.
I live in North White Plains section of the town of North Castle. Our power went out last Friday at 1:15, at which time we reported it and expected eventually to have it come back on, our faith in Con Ed. Sunday evening we went out to dinner, and while we were sitting at the restaurant, a message came through. The power has been restored. And we thought, gee, maybe the tree that we just saw still laying where it fell, maybe that was not our tree responsible for our outage, but we didn't believe it. But you still can't help a little bit, a little glimmer of hope. The message was correct. But the interesting thing about the message that you get, that the power was restored, it asks you to respond to them. You can say no, you can say yes, or you can say unknown. We clicked, of course, unknown. We weren't home. They were asking us to verify what they were telling us. They were telling us our power was back on. Why do we have to tell them yes, no, or unknown? So that's the way that one went. And we, like everyone else, continue to get the messages that by 11 p.m. on any given night, power would come on. So we would check status regularly on their website. On Tuesday, we checked the status, and they had no open ticket on us. We were removed from their to-do list. So we had to report the outage again. This went on a couple of times. We got a status report on Wednesday at 1 a.m. that the power would be restored, would not be restored until the 8th due to the storm. Fine. Finally, yesterday morning, we were informed power would be restored Friday, today, at 11 p.m. And they were good to do that. But the last comment on that notification was, however, no crew has been assigned. There we are. There we are.
It was apparent by Sunday that the goals that were set by the two utilities were not going to be met. I had a press conference at the Emergency Operations Center on Sunday afternoon. I had done a tour of some of the communities myself, and our team had been out in other ones, and we were on phone contact with many of the folks you see here. And NYSEG had indicated that they would be fully back as of Monday night, and Con Edison said they'd be back fully Tuesday night. And we did not see empirical evidence that made us think that that was possible, as mentioned by any number of other people. It was at that point that I had counseled. I have very active social media. I counseled people, keep calm, carry on, give the opportunity for these things to happen, because you want to show the ability to soldier through. We're a tough people, we're a resilient people. However, when deadlines were missed on Monday and Tuesday, there was no reconnection on strategy to make any new deadline. There was just the creation of another new deadline. And then you begin to realize there's no correlation between their assessment of how much work had to be done. Were they going to get to Kathleen? Were they going to get to Rikia? Were they going to get to Anthony and all the other Anthonys and Kathleens and Rikias that are out there? And the answer became obvious that no, they weren't. But at no point in time did any of us ever know how many actual crews do you have out there? How many? It would seem to me as a layman, I'm not a utility company professional, it would seem to me that you would call the mayor of White Plains. And you'd say, Mr. Mayor, do you and your police group have a good handle on how many incidents there are in White Plains? You would reach out to the elected official in whatever community there is. In Yorktown and Somers, which were drastically hit by this. And in every one of those communities, the local officials knew just how many places were obstructed. And then help them prioritize for you who in each community was a Rikia, and then who in each community were ready to be able to shelter in place or to be moved. That's local information that local officials could provide. You can provide that in Portchester for Portchester. There is no way that the Central Power Company is going to be able to know that. But they didn't change their strategy. They merely communicated in the same exact way that they had done up to that point. The robocalls were filled with erroneous information, for which, as Anthony articulately said, intelligent people could not make prudent decisions. Almost every one of these communities opened warming shelters, and those warming shelters were there as a respite. But do you stay there overnight? How do you know if the robocall doesn't give you accurate information? People went to the website. The website information was not accurate. Every morning, when we tried to provide a countywide briefing and a status report, we couldn't count on the website figures that we saw. They were not accurate. I made the comment at the time, I've repeated it. Ronald Reagan once quoted the Russians. Dovernai no provenyai, back when he was negotiating with Gorbachev. Trust but verify. There was no verification of numbers that we were receiving individually or collectively that told us exactly how far we got. So what do I see in this? I don't see it from my position as a county executive. As a county executive, I see the human impact, and I see good local officials working hard, trying to do the right thing, traveling around, dealing with blockages in the road, with men who are out there doing the best they can. I go back to my corporate days. And in my corporate days, it's very simple. Were I to have failed in an operation like this, were it obvious to my superiors that by Tuesday or Wednesday I had not ramped up sufficiently to deal with the issue, did not have an effective communications strategy in place, did not have a handle on how long it would take for us to satisfy full completion, knowing that we had a snowstorm coming in on Thursday, my superior would have said to me, George, you failed this company. You're fired. Yeah. That's how it works in corporate America. Anybody who's worked for a major corporation, there's not a grievance process. You can think about grievance as you're packing up your desk and walking down to your car and driving home to tell somebody that you're now unemployed because you failed on the job. And for those who might think that my anger of the moment was inappropriate, it grew as I listened to these stories over the course of each and every call. I know who Chris Steers is. I know what he does in the village of Portchester. I know the work that's happening in Peekskill as I have come to see it. I know the dedication of the fire department in each of these communities. And when you know that and you hear that they're not being addressed and you get corporate speak in return, not from the local people that you're liaising with, not from the people on the line, senior management. Senior management has an obligation to come out into the field and to stay in the field and to be available to make executive decisions on the spot. Let me be candid. This job that I have is the best paid job I've ever had in public office. Like Danielle Taggart Epstein, I was once a Rise City councilman. My salary was $0. Like Catherine Parker, I was a county legislator, and in those days I made about $29,000 to my recollection. Like Ben Boykin, I was once chairman of the board, and I took home about $65,000. As a state assemblyman like David Buchwald, I made the minimum $79,500, and then as a senator under Audrey Stewart Cousins' conference, I made $91,500. I now make $160,000. That's public record, so I'm not telling what you don't know. I have more money because I have more responsibility. I am held more accountable with this job than when I was one of 7 council members on the City of Rye Council. I have that obligation, and so does the leadership of NYSEG, and so does the leadership of Con Ed. Con Ed was missing in action. Carl Taylor from NYSEG did visit. I will credit him for that. But the executive teams did not come down, set up operations, observe what was happening, interact with our people on an ongoing basis, and make changes on the spot the way any effective corporate executive would. And I've spent 2 months as a county executive. I spent 20 years as a corporate executive being held accountable every day. So I'm calling for them to step down. I'm calling for the senior management teams to step down. I don't begrudge them their salaries. Their salaries are multiple millions of dollars. I don't resent that they're paid for that, but I expect them to do that job. And that job required them to be here in Westchester County this last week, and they were not. Now, the collective public power of the state legislators and the county legislators and the municipal executives that are here, and myself as county executive, we don't have direct power to make these men do anything. But I will tell you what you already know. These 2 utilities have lost the confidence of their consumers. They've lost the confidence. They can't trust what's on the website. They can't trust what's going to ring on their phone in a robocall. And when somebody comes by to read their meter, that poor guy is going to hear it in Technicolor, because that's the face of Con Edison, that's the face of NYSEG to the person they're going to deal with. This is a time for corporate internal analysis. The shareholders of these companies need to look very carefully about the leadership team. As brilliant as these men, I assume they're all men, if there are any women there, they're part of the executive chamber. It is time for them to look realistically and say, did you rise to the occasion in that week in March? Or were you not there on the front lines? Were you not there for Rikia? Were you not there for Anthony? Were you not there for Kathleen? Were you not there for Susan? Were you not there interacting with these local officials to try to get more people online sooner? That's the assessment that has to happen. The Public Service Commission has authority. The governor has authority. I'm very appreciative of what the state has done. The state put at our disposal members of the National Guard. They worked with us as we did with local governments. We provided some staff for Cortland and some equipment for Pound Ridge and some things, and the state did even more than that. And Kathy Calhoun, the Director of Operations, who spent her time, she came down, spent overnight in the EOC, along with local folks, Peter Hark and Brian Hecht and others, who were on the spot overnight. They helped us through the New York State DOT get our traffic lights up at various key intersections. But missing in action at the highest and most important level of these utility companies. That's why we're here today. We're here today to say, what I said that day, we're done. We're not pleading. I'm not a pleader. I always request nicely, but I'm not pleading. I want to see change in the corporate boardroom because there was failure on the streets of this county, and someone's going to be accountable for it. And when the individuals are accountable for it, the new action team has to come in and put in place a workable plan. That plan has to be negotiated with the local governments and the first responders. It has to be a plan that will change this reality, because Linda Puglisi hasn't reached her 30th year. And when she does reach her 30th year, I want her to say to me, George, in those last 3 years, it changed. In those last 3 years, we finally got through to these utility companies. They are a monopoly because we as a society believe that having the kind of competition to put up wires to deliver service to your front door is not efficient. So they are granted areas of turf and sole responsibility as distributors of electricity. You can buy your generation from a number of different people. But that privilege is a privilege that involves state authority. And I'm very sure the governor and the PSC is going to look very carefully about whether these two particular utilities should continue to hold their authority. And if you recall, there were some changes made on Long Island after Sandy. Changes can be made again. So do the right thing. Stand up for the decisions you should have made. Make the change in senior management. Put people in who understand that they're directly accountable to the people, not customers, people that they serve. Now, I'm sure you have a series of questions. Let me just ask, are we doing questions here? Are we doing them individually? We're doing questions here. Okay, now my eyesight obviously is a bit to grasp, so I'll point and try to get in the best I can.
How many customers are still out in Westchester, and maybe can you divide it between NYSEG and Con Ed?
Do we have accurate statistics from this morning, Joan McDonald? All right, as soon as we have them, we'll be happy to announce them for you. The numbers are better. They've come down dramatically after yesterday's work. Yes, ma'am.
So realistically, you're calling for the leadership to step down and you want the boardroom to change completely. I understand that. Realistically, what really could possibly happen here? I mean, because you're saying that you really have no control, no authority to make change.
We can't do this directly, but the power and the pressure of Westchester County now comes to bear on the Public Service Commission and those who do have the power to affect corporate boardroom change. And so I don't believe we are ineffective, we just don't have the direct power. There's a difference between the two. Yes?
What can you do to ensure that there is change for the next storm? You spelled out some of what you want to see happen.
Well, I expect as these hearings are held, and we're going to regurgitate Moreland Commission suggestions and probably add some additional suggestions to them, I suspect that every single entity here is going to be doing a recap when this is over of what happened, what went well and what didn't go well, and what kind of suggestions and changes would come out of that. The accumulation of that will be put before both what the board scrutiny will be and the PSC scrutiny, and we will encourage that to be locked in a more profound way so that to the best extent possible this doesn't happen again. We recognize Mother Nature has a reality to it, and that's why the day after or 2 days after the storm, we're not screaming and yelling. But there's no excuse for the website. There's no excuse for the robocalls. There's no excuse for the misinformation. There's no excuse for trying to lay it off on the DPW crews when it was your crews that didn't get out there. So, Martin, those things are immediate changes. Do we have the numbers, Joe?
For New York State Electric and Gas.
Just, do you want to say it? If you can see it better.
Sure. For New York State Electric and Gas, for Westchester County as of 11/08, 6,941. For Con Edison, 13,000. That's customers,
Right.
correct.
So an aggregate of 20,000 customers, and every customer certainly has more than one person that is served by that. So we could easily be talking 40,000 human beings. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Should we assume, given the people who are standing behind you, that you all agree that there should be resignations?
Yes.
Yes.
And you're going to have the opportunity to talk to any of these individuals once we break from this format. My friends know that I'm the most egalitarian person. At every press conference, I try to include everybody else who's there. That isn't a possibility today. But there are very thoughtful people from all different capacities here, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk with you individually and express in their voice how they view this issue. Other hands that may be up? Yes?
Is the county executive office now going to become more consumer protection oriented, number one. Number two, should Westchester businesses have any concern that the Westchester County government is going to start trying to tell them how to run their business?
Well, first of all, no to the second question, because in this particular case, Westchester County businesses were just as negatively affected by what happened here. We have no interest in involving ourselves in how businesses operate unless they fail in a matter of public service that's essential. So if you're dealing with selling a product or a service profitably that doesn't involve an essential public service, you function completely independent of regulation by Westchester County. In terms of the impacts on businesses, I suspect that there are small business owners and arguably larger businesses as well that face the same decisions and had to get the same information. Now, oftentimes the larger business has their own generation system, power generation system, and so they can continue to operate regardless of the circumstances. The small business community, I suspect, was as equally affected as people are here, lost money over the course of these last 8 days and probably have as much of a complaint. But just to make the point, I made it a point of visiting the Mamaroneck Chamber of Commerce meeting on Tuesday night. Next Wednesday morning I'll be at the Rye Chamber of Commerce meeting, and I intend to ask those very questions. The first point that you asked was, again, Peter? Consumer protection.
Is the county executive's office now going to become more consumer-oriented?
Well, we've just done something that I'm very proud of. We've hired Westchester County Legislator James Mazzano to become Director of Consumer Protection. And let the record know, Jim is a Republican. No one's asked him to change his political affiliation. He maintains his party affiliation. But we brought him on board because he's dynamic. He's already jumped into issues that were important, such as making sure there wasn't price gouging during this season, whether in gas stations or hotels or any other places. So the consumer protection energizing from Jim's leadership, I think, is going to be helpful. What we did, Peter, in this is really simple leadership, not grandiose leadership. I'm not pounding my chest with success. But we saw something that was happening across the board, and we knew that we had to bring people together to make a singular voice out of this. So it wasn't any one elected official saying one thing. Divided, who is going to listen to a particular municipality? But united, we make a strong singular statement. That was what we did in the Office of the County Executive. We made sure that a strong singular statement was made, not on behalf of county government, but on behalf of the people that provide government services all across the board.
What kind of pressure, if any, can you put on the Public Service Commission to get utilities?
Well, I expect, Michelle, that we're going to have both public testimony when they hold their hearings and then also private conversations. And I expect, as I said a second ago, that each of these communities are going to do their post-mortem. After this is over, they're going to identify the things that they felt was important, and any number of them are going to both testify publicly. And, you know, we may determine, I'll speak to John Rhodes, does he want to have an informal meeting with certain selected people within a region? We certainly had regional amplification of the problems, as you saw, because you covered the storm, very thoroughly in your, your capacity. Our northern Westchester community, served by NYSEG, suffered in some very specific ways because of the lack of population density, the limited number of roads that serve an area. When a road closes, it created a public health threat because there's no other way to get into the neighborhood for EMS or fire purposes. So I expect that there will be variations of the suggestions based on the geography. At the other end of the spectrum, and I heard the mayor of Mount Vernon talk about this on one of the calls, the densely populated parts of our county have yet a different priority and challenge. So I suspect each of these communities will summarize their experience. That will be shared with the PSC. And look, I know, and that was implicit in the question you asked, you're looking for direct cause and effect. If you're looking for direct cause and effect, we don't have the direct cause and effect to be able to say, hey, you're fired, like that guy in The Apprentice thing did. We don't have that direct cause and effect. But the pressure that's created from the Rikias and the Anthonys and the Kathleens have now reached the point at which a universal group of elected officials now feel that same anger and that same desire for change. And that is a powerful advocacy force in what is yet to come. Any other group questions before we just let everybody do their thing? Thank you. Just go ahead.
Is there anything that the municipalities could have done to prepare better for the storm?
Well, I think each community will address that on their own. I think some communities have built-in systems that are really terrific. I had the pleasure of seeing the Pound Ridge system and the graphics in their town hall. And my first reaction was, I want one of those. And then I want one of those for every community. But I think that, Mark, the questions are asked individually rather than collectively, if there are certain things that have to have been done. And I'm sure they're going to look at that and come back with a response strategy. We can all do better. We could certainly do better in what we're doing. But there's a gap between doing as much as we could do and then learning how to do it better, and then failing to do that which was considered, I think, the necessary minimum. All right, so we're going to stop this situation. I'm happy to take any questions myself individually, but let me let all my colleagues go out and communicate. Thank you for your time, your effort, and your leadership.